learners, welcome to this MOOC on population and society. So in the previous module, we discussed about the major population surveys as sources of population data. Today, in this video, we will discuss the 8th module that is titled History of Population Growth and Transformation. The major objectives of this module is to introduce you all to the concept of population growth, various determinants of population growth, the history of demographic growth, then we'll go on to population growth and its consequences in developing countries like India, and finally we will discuss the concept of population bomb. So now let us begin this unit by understanding the concept of population growth. So in general terms, population growth refers to the change in the number of individuals over a specific period of time. Population growth varies from nation to nation and also among different regions of a nation. These variations are caused by several factors which can sometimes be direct or indirect. Demographers usually concentrate on 4 criteria when attempting to estimate changes in population size. These are mortality rates, fertility rates, migration, and initial age profile, that is whether the population is relatively young or old. Out of this, mortality rates and fertility rates are the 2 most important factors responsible for population growth. This module aims to examine the elements influencing population growth globally with a specific focus on the Indian context. So now we come to the determinants of population growth. The variations in population growth across the globe are caused by different determinants or factors. And some of these major factors are, firstly, there is the demographic determinants. It is one of the principal determinants of population growth. It is induced by the degrees of fertility, mortality, and migration. Fertility and mortality are considered as more important factors than migration. The rate of growth is primarily determined by the correlation between birth and death rates. Though migration also affects the population growth in a country or a region, it is only in the respect of regional variations and open populations. Otherwise, it is not much effective as a determinant of growth of population. Then, fertility as an important determinant of population growth has a direct impact on the growth and size and structure of the population. This is unlike the migration rates, it has a direct impact. So in population dynamics, fertility is the positive force through which the population expands, counteracting all the forces of erosion caused by mortality rates. If this replacement of human beings is not adequate, that is, if the number of deaths in a particular society continues to be more than that of the births in a society, the society as a whole will face the danger of becoming extinct. However, if we see the other side of the coin, if the fertility rates are higher, it can have economic and social implications too. For instance, if we consider a population and it has a high proportion of dependents, it can strain resources and services. Thus, understanding and managing fertility is essential for policymakers and demographers when planning for the future and addressing various societal and economic challenges. Now, along with fertility, mortality rates had also played a dominant role in determining the growth of population. After the Industrial Revolution, the increase in the population of European countries was mainly due to a decline in the death rates. The developing countries, which are undergoing a typical demographic transition, have also been affected initially by that decline in the death rates. So in countries like India too, the most important factor that has caused a very high growth rate has been the sudden and phenomenal fall in the death rate. Migration, along with the fertility and mortality, is the third dynamic constituent of population growth. A population may gain in size by experiencing an influx of migration, and it may diminish in size by an exodus of some of its members to join another population or another country or region. All sort of migrations have played a very important role in the history of population growth in most of the countries. The only principal mechanism for the wide variations in population growth rate is internal migration. The rural to urban migration, that is, I'm talking in case of internal migration, is usually associated with industrialization and urbanization. Migrants from the rural areas develop a tendency to adopt the urban ways of life, which in turn has a direct impact on population growth. Migration, it can also change the size, structure, and the sex ratio of the population quite drastically at any point of time. Regional growth rate results from both the differential natural increase and also the increasing migration, thus leading to a growth in the overall population of a particular place. Now, we come to the second type of determinants, that is the socio-economic determinants. Socio-economic factors, as we all know, play a significant role in shaping population growth patterns. These factors can either encourage or discourage population growth, and they often interact with the other social and demographic factors. For instance, the massive demands for labor by the expanding American economy in the 19th century led to emigration from the old world, just as the Industrial Revolution in Britain created the opportunity for rural to urban migration. So as people move from rural to urban areas seeking better economic prospects, this can influence population growth by changing the distribution of the population. But it is also acceptable that there can be population growth without having a demand for labor. How is that possible? Like if we consider the standard of living, good educational facilities and healthcare, these conditions provides for the economic conditions that are required in a particular place, and these conditions also leads to an increase and decrease in the population in a particular area. Now thirdly, we come to the technological determinants. So while technology itself does not directly determine population growth, it does influence the demographic patterns and shape population dynamics. Some technological determinants of population growth may include like advances in medical facilities, transport, agricultural and industrial technologies, and these advances, along with having a potential to promote population growth, also have demographic consequences such as changing age structures and fertility rates. Population growth and technology advancements interact in a complex and context-dependent way. It differs from one country or region to the next. In addition, the way that technology influences population dynamics is greatly influenced by other factors, that is social, economic and also political factors. So now we come to the fourth factor, that is natural environment and land use development. Along with the other mentioned factors which I have mentioned earlier, favorable climatic conditions, forest coverage, built up lands, cultural and aesthetic resources can be some of the other important determinants of population growth. So after going through the various factors of population growth, let us now move on to understand the history of population growth in the global context. Now, if we consider the global demographic scenario, we can see that for much of human history, that is in pre-industrial societies, demographic patterns were reasonably stable. That is, human population grew slowly at that time. This was the case because in the past, birth rates were high, but since the mortality rates were also high, we observed no or only very small population growth. The main reason for such high mortality rates were factors like epidemics, recurrent wars, acute and chronic food shortages, and that food shortages cause famines and other conditions of malnutrition, as well as poor sanitary conditions. This describes the reality through most of our history. Although pandemics and epidemics had a significant impact on population, long-term trends were not significantly affected by these transient effects. The equilibrium is the population trend was thought to have existed among all human populations up until the end of 18th century. Actually, since the agricultural revolution, more than 10,000 years ago, growth rates have been less than 0.05% at the very least. Then what happened in the next phase, that is the industrial era, was that the health of the population started to improve and the mortality rate started to fall. At least in Europe, the initial decline in mortality was brought about by a period of peace that was followed by a number of agricultural innovations, and that significantly increased the food supply, which was then further enhanced by the abundance of resources for the New World. Also, it can be further stated that the essential stimuli came from the joint processes of factors like industrialization and urbanization and also modernization. And at last, the improvements in hygiene and medicine allowed for the management of childhood and adult illnesses. To sum up, the modernization process in Europe and its overseas territories resulted in increased living standards, thus improved disease control, and also at the same time decreased the mortality rates. And likewise, similar developments over a period in other countries also have gradually contributed to the decline of their mortality rates. Following the World War II, many developing nations saw a sharp drop in mortality that was unrelated to economic growth, since these nations imported health and disease control strategies from the developed world. This covered vaccinations, the use of antibiotics like penicillin, and the spraying of DDT. Developing nations could import techniques developed by economically developed nations and use them at a relatively lower cost in mass public health programs, thanks to the scientific communication and international cooperation. The World Health Organization's assistance in the fight against mass killers like smallpox and malaria also played a major role in the decline in mortality rates. Due to this rapid decline in mortality in the developing world, there has been a significant increase in the population growth. This was because fertility has been rising for a longer period, and the concurrent trend of declining mortality caused a huge increase in the population. These past and projected additions to world population have been and will increasingly be distributed unevenly across the world, which we even see today. And if you consider the context of contemporary times, 95% of population growth occur in developing countries. The population of the world's 50 least developed countries is expected to be more than double of the middle of this century, with several poor countries tripling their population over the period. By contrast, the population of the developed world is expected to remain steady at around 1.2 billion, with population declines in some wealthy countries. So you can see that in developing countries, the population is rapidly growing because the mortality rates have lowered, but then again the birth rates have remained the same, or even got higher. So this is the problem which we are facing in the developing countries. The difference in population growth between developed and developing nations is a reflection of the significant variations in migration, birth, and death patterns that exist within and between national populations, as well as across the racial and ethnic groupings. The discrepancy has coincided with changes in the age group composition of populations. An overview of these factors illuminate the mechanism of global population growth and change. So in this figure, we can see the demographic conditions of the developed and developing countries throughout the decades. So as you can see, the developing countries, the population is growing and growing, and it tends to grow till the year 2050. In context, if we compare the developed countries, the rates are quite stable, if you can see the figure. So now, after this, let us move on to the demographic transitions or transformation that is happening in Indian context. After getting an overview of the global demographic scenario that I have discussed, now let us move on to understanding the demographic conditions and changes in India. So what was the situation in India during the colonial era? The primary source of information on the demographic state of British India's population was gathered from an 1881 census. During this time, there were significant demographic disasters. For instance, the life expectancy at birth was approximately 32 years until 1901. After that, it decreased over the next 20 years, reaching its lowest point ever in 1911 to 1921, in the year of crop failures, inflations, and global influenza pandemic. These all were happening during that time. And growth accelerated to about 1% and then 1.4% annually only after 1921. Thus, the rising death rates were a defining feature of colonial modernization, which decades up until 1921. Scholars like Guha, he wrote about the famines and epidemics like the bubonic plague and influenza, which took a lot of lives during that period. Amartya Sen wrote on the poor living conditions and how the famine affected poor were unable to procure the food distributed by the transport networks. The worst famine in India was the Bengal famine in 1943. An estimated 3 million people died from starvation, malaria, and other diseases aggravated by unsanitary conditions, lack of healthcare, malnutrition, and many other factors. And in the post-independence era, following the British withdrawal in 1947, the successor states had to quickly mobilize to deal with the devastating population displacement that came along with the division of British India. According to a recent study, 6 to 7 million Muslim population migrated out of India between 1947 and 1950, while 2.5 million non-Muslims came in from East Pakistan and 4.7 million from West Pakistan. During the violence that led to this flight and the hardships they endured en route, hundreds and thousands of people died. For many years, there was a constant influx from East Pakistan, and in terms of population, the newly formed Indian Republic was more industrialized and urbanized than the divided country, but it had lost West Punjab, its only consistent area of food surplus. The USA during this time helped India, with India was ship-to-mouth intervention was there for the next 2 decades. The directive principles of the new constitution enjoined the state to improve the health and nutrition of its people, with more than 3% of the spending under the first and second 5-year plans. The health system expanded significantly. Eventually, the famines were avoided by skillfully managing the ship-to-mouth process, but the chronic malnutrition still persisted. By the 1960s, with the improvement in health and infrastructure, the life expectancy moved from 32 to 44 years. Also, the administration's effort to contain epidemics and outbreaks have been successful in reducing the death rates during this period. This led to a massive population explosion during the period. This population explosion results from relatively rapid declines in death rates that I have already mentioned, and these changes were brought about by improved nutrition, public health, and advanced disease control techniques. But it takes society longer to adapt its reproductive habits, which were developed during a time of extreme poverty and high death rates, to the new circumstances of relative prosperity and longer lifespans. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Western Europe saw this kind of change. Less developed nations, however, is having difficulty bringing down the birth rate in line with the declining death rate due to various factors. The demographic shift has not yet been fully achieved in India, as we can see, and although the mortality rate has decreased, the birth rate has not. Still, as the experience of several countries has shown, effective improvements in governance and infrastructure does have the probability to immensely accelerate such transitions to a low fertility and low mortality pattern. After understanding the history of population growth in the global and Indian context, let us now move on further to discuss the causes of population growth, particularly in the context of India. So, there are many causes. Out of that, improvement in transport facilities is a major factor that has helped people to avail the medical and health facilities without many difficulties. It has saved countless lives and added to the size of the population. Then social attitude of Indians. These social evils like ignorance, then poverty, illiteracy, absence of recreational facilities, attitudes of conservatism, orthodoxy, extreme religiosity, etc. are factors that are responsible for the rapid growth of population. Then we come to excess birth over death. Population growth depends on the excess of birth over deaths. Death rate has been gradually declining in India, but as we can see, the birth rate is still there and it's growing. Then progress in medical knowledge. So the advanced medical knowledge and its application has helped us to control the spread of life-taking diseases like malaria, TB, cholera, plague, influenza, smallpox and such other diseases, and protected the people from the jaws of death. Then the other factor are social factors like universal marriage, child marriage and early marriage. These social factors have contributed a lot in the population increase. Indian traditional system prescribes marriage as a social obligation. Further, in most cases, there is also a lack of conscious family planning. Now, after going through the causes, we now come to understand what are the consequences of population growth. So we all know that when a population surpasses a reasonable limit, issues arise that pose threats to livelihoods on different scales. Here, a few effects of the fast population growth will be discussed. So if we talk about the consequences, we have to mention the relation with poverty. So poverty and excessive population growth often go hand in hand. In fact, in many cases, these two phenomena cohabit as the cause and the effect. Then, of course, when there is population growth, there will also be unemployment and underemployment. So in addition to receiving the food and shelter, the rising population also needs to be given employment. Already when there is a problem with underemployment and unemployment, a significant rise in population leads to the furthering such issues. Then we come to low per capita income. So during the last 50 years of planning, the national per capita income of this country has increased by about 3.6% per annum, but the rate of increase is too low if we compare it. The low per capita income of India is attributed to rapid population growth. Then we come to shortage of food. A country like India, even though it has attained self-sufficiency in food production, it is unable to produce enough of food sufficient for the mass or the majority of the population. As a result, a greater portion of human being suffers from malnutrition and other diseases related to insufficient nutrition. So this will increase the cost of social overheads. For every government, it is quite difficult to find sufficient funds to meet these unproductive expenses. Then the next factor is population and labor efficiency. Since an increase in population reduces the per capita income, the standard of living of the people also deteriorates. This affects very badly on the health and the productive efficiency of workers, and the physical as well as the mental efficiency also becomes low due to this phenomenon. Now, again, there are factors of population and the standard of living. So, standard of living connotes the quantity and the quality of consumption of the people. The rapid growth of population often affects adversely on the standard of living of the people. And with the population increase, we come to the last factor, that is population increase also causes pressure on land. That is, we all know that land is limited natural resource and that cannot be produced in order to offer space to the increasing population. An increase in population can put a very heavy pressure on it, thus degrading the quality of the land. Then we come to increase unproductive consumers. When there is a rapid growth of population in a country like India, there will also be a large proportion of unproductive consumers. Rapid growth of population contributes to an increase in the dependency ratio. And then this dependency ratio causes slow economic development. So economic development is bound to be slower in a country in which the population is growing at a very, very fast rate. Absence of savings results in low capital formation. The shortage of capital has restricted investment and contributed to the slow economic growth of the country. Then there are also other factors like political unrest and climate changes and environmental disorders, which causes like overpopulation, and the matter of climate change has also become a mere threat to all sorts of animals and species. Overpopulation has led to various imbalances in the natural environment because of population expansion. Carbon footprint, various kinds of population, global warming are also some of the bad effects of overpopulation. And it also, in a way, causes the growing urbanization and slums. Overpopulation results in the creation of city and urban life. It thus gives rise to crowd and slums. Now, after going through the causes and consequences, we come to the last concept, that is the concept of population bomb. While discussing the reasons and consequences of population growth and overpopulation, this concept of population bomb is also very important and must be brought into notice. So Paul Ehrlich, in his book The Population Bomb, argued that many of the dire earlier predictions of Malthus were not far from wrong. He claims that the growth in world population is equivalent to a time bomb ready to go off in the near future, which can cause dismal consequences. He emphasized on the fact that the sheer mathematics of population growth worldwide are sufficient to demonstrate that world population cannot possibly continue to expand at its present rates. Ehrlich and his wife Anne pointed out that the worldwide population growth has outgrown the food production and that massive starvation must inevitably follow because of this reason. They were among the earliest modern thinkers who focused in the correlation between population growth and the environmental issues that takes place because of the growing population. They argued that the quality of the environment, especially the availability of clean air and water, was a critical factor in the growth and the health of population. Regarding their justification, they pointed to mass starvation in many parts of Africa, the intensity of hunger and poverty in the United States among the black and the Hispanic populations, increased homelessness in the cities, rampant extinctions of several species of plants and animals, and irrecoverable destruction of environments such as the rainforest as evidence of the massive threats if population growth and environmental degradation are not checked. So with this, we have come to the ending part of this module. To reiterate, we started off this unit by understanding the concept of population growth. Then we moved on to see the various determinants of population growth. Then successively, we also tried to understand the global population scenario while also focusing on the Indian context. Following this, we moved on to understanding the causes and consequences of overpopulation. And lastly, we summed up this module by going through the concept of population boom, which is intricate in understanding the population growth and its adverse effects in the society. Dear learners, in the subsequent modules, we will also discuss in detail the impact of population growth on urbanization, interrelationship between population growth and environmental changes, and also sustainable development. With this, I will end the video for today. Thank you.